That's awesome though. Hey,
Yeah.
Joel, you're gonna like this session. It's very well connects to yours from last week.
I'm so excited. I love the local library idea.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah.
Art taught me so much.
Let's see. Gotta make sure. Got stuff ready. Stoked. I should probably actually. Let me see if I can change that real quick. Video.
Everyone. Everyone's morning going.
Hey there, Madison. Hi, everyone.
Hello. Hey. All right, there we go. I turned off my background for a moment. I'm going to end up showing stuff that's not going to line up, okay?
Background though, this is kind of sad.
Right, mushrooms are great. It kind of fits in. My cellular networks fit into this a bit.
And I was gonna say I keep eating the green pills still.
That's awesome. I'm pretty much on my last. I think I have 2 left.
Oh, nice. I like Tic Tacs. Might have to start getting them regularly.
There's a thread on how to make it. It's really easy. If you want to start green pilling people.
So you just print something out and then tape it to the Tic Tac.
Pretty much.
Nice, yeah. Do anything fun this morning? Anyone have how's everyone's day going?
You know, it was a pretty rainy day earlier, like in the morning, like earlier in the morning. I was hoping it'd be rainy all through the call though, because those make for nice cozy days. So yeah, feel that.
New York is about the time where it's like perfect weather. It's easy and sunny. It's very nice. Don't even have to leave with a jacket or anything.
That sounds nice. I got sunburn a couple days ago just trying to mow my yard.
Armando, I saw you nodding your head. Do you live in New York?
No, I'm kind of enjoying your experience because I'm in Mexico and in Guadalajara, and right now it's that time of the year where you can even sleep at night because it's so hot that you cannot escape from the heat. It's terrible, but I'm doing fine.
Yeah, that sounds quite intense to deal with. Like here it's just been in the 90s, which is really weird for mid-spring in the Midwest. So like, yeah, that's about all I have. That's not quite blistering, keeping you up at night though. That's just like crank on a fan or two.
We're in the Midwest. That's weird to hear that it's like 90s right now in the Midwest.
Right? We barely even get snow anymore. It hurts.
I'm just laughing because Armando was literally doing that gif of the dog in the burning room where he's like, everything's on fire, but it's fine.
Yeah, exactly. That's me.
Yeah.
On Sunday here Google says, or Weather Channel or whatever says Sunday is gonna be 96.
You guys can come to Canada. We didn't have the last snow yet, I think.
Yes, please.
That's a huge debate. I love snow.
Really? Well,
yeah, like
okay.
I mean, I'm a summer child, but I don't know. I love it. I've driven through blizzards numerous times up through Michigan and everything like that, and it's entertaining.
Maybe
for a bit.
if you're not, maybe if you're not all the time in it, but when
That's
you're like
fair.
every day, have to go to work and you can't get to work because of the snow and stuff.
That's very fair.
Yep. So I guess it's a constant debate.
Yeah.
Yeah, but not to be in. Wait, where in Canada are you from? Because I know there's a lot of people from Vancouver.
Calgary, actually. I'm the Western girl, more central Western than Vancouver, I guess. But yeah, Calgary.
Vancouver, there's tons of Web3 people in Vancouver.
Oh yeah, it is definitely more of a Web3 space, and I think eventually Calgary will become one as well. But we're just so tied to oil and gas and banking still. It's the mindset of people is not there yet, but I'm really hoping it's getting there.
You're gonna. Okay, well, I think. So, are we ready to get started?
Yeah, I think I'm good. I can boink.
I'm gonna hype you up for a second. So first of all, I'm gonna be helping facilitate the call today. And today we have a guest that, as she describes, is, I love this, instead of using the term rabbit hole, is 500 leagues deep in the vast ocean of Web3 and public goods, which is awesome. and I've already learned so much from her in the brief call we had yesterday to prep for the session. So the core member of the Public Goods Library is like at every single call. So I'm sure many of you already know her. But for those who don't, Sel is a data hoarder by trade, but spends most of her time lately hoarding stories. And she was also in KB4. And today's topic actually pairs really well with Joel's session from last week, if you were here, which was about local blockchain. And the topic today is library Legos, and we're going to be talking all about what libraries are and what they could be with Web3. And Sel will have a presentation and then will lead us into a discussion. And during the presentation and after, you can also leave your thoughts in the Figma that she created. I'll drop the link in a second and tag you all in the thread. And then, as always, you can also have discussions in the Discord thread if you want to. And then last thing to get started is a reminder about the second week of the Public Goods Reading Club hosted by Henry in the Common Room. It will be at the same time as last week, so Thursday at 6:45 p.m. Eastern. And if you're interested, I can DM you all the details, so just let me know. So I'm going to drop that Figma in the chat, but other than that, Sel, go ahead and take it away.
Okay. So with the Figma, you guys feel free just to keep adding thoughts as you go. I figured it'd be good just to get it out there to everybody, so that way you can just throw sticky notes in. And I wanted to leave it as open as possible, so that way I can get as many thoughts as possible on it as we go. So a core concept I'm going to be referring to over and over through this call is going to be in regards to my core Zeal networks. I've heard a lot of people talk about mycelial networks and just how mushrooms communicate and share resources. But within my core Zeal networks, numerous plants share resources just as long as they share like about the same family of fungi that connect all their roots. Societies in and of themselves are pretty similar to this in how we're all connected through a vast social web of resources, and certain communities can get isolated from those resources just depending on various socioeconomic conditions. There's a whole lot of systemic issues here in the US, for instance, over the last century that have led to a whole bunch of disparities even within tight communities. Like within my community, for instance, the second most expensive neighborhood to live in Ohio, or little metropolitan city area, is within the same metropolitan area as one of the cheapest. So there's just a huge disparity even within my own locality. But I believe that libraries are also very well equipped to deal with these disparities, given that they permeate everywhere. Local library branches tend to be in just about every neighborhood they can get into. There's about, I think, when I looked into, about 17,000 library branches, amongst 9,000 different networks. So even within rural areas that have just about one library per town, there's still about 8,000 libraries that are still connected to all these other institutions, be them universities, each other, just to share resources such as like books. But they still need better tools for coordinating. If you look into a lot of research that's been done in the last decades in regards to libraries, a lot of them have to do with what they currently offer with the limited resources they have due to lack of funding. So that's where I believe we could come in. I think we could give a whole bunch of tools for addressing that. And reflecting a bit on Aaron Maniam's call, though, I'm going to tie a bit of that into this, as well as these 8 forms of capital that I've seen referenced a couple times in Gitcoin forums and just general chats. Libraries are an interesting way to deal with interlocking commons, as we were talking about with the tragedy of the commons, in that they link so many different forms of capital. And they link so many different commons together, and supporting them with information and resources and just general public education around them. So that way they can change local conditions, change local statutes, and get the funding that they tend to need. I put a few examples of ways that they can connect to all 8 of these different forms of capital. And if anybody has any examples of local things that they like in their own library, that'd be awesome if they want to share, because I also have a whole bunch of flyers that I have collected from there, and pictures from the next slide of what my local library offers beyond just books, as they also can offer a sense of community for little neats like me who don't have friends and need help making friends. So they offer a bunch of different programs, from book clubs to heritage events for cultural education and celebrations, all kinds of educational resources, tech literacy classes, which are incredibly important, and something that I believe that we could even offer as Web3 becomes bigger and bigger, because being safe in the Web3 space is very, very crucial, and at this point kind of nuanced. And there needs to be some level of tech literacy to know what you're doing when you're signing messages in MetaMask or setting up a wallet or maintaining your private key. Yeah, so libraries are a wonderful, wonderful source to deal with just interlocking commons and helping people get resources that they need, from access to jobs, education, and just a myriad of resources. Even ones that you wouldn't really think, like my hometown even has a discrete access to domestic violence victims, so that way they can get hooked up with shelters and get out of like dangerous situations. And larger metropolitan areas where homelessness is more of a problem, they even offer access to shelters and resources for them as well. And I think in San Francisco, they've even gotten a couple hundred people hooked up with permanent housing. So it's one of those things where libraries permeate all the way from homeless, all the way up through the economic ladder, and then from the uneducated all the way up through academia. Like it permeates so many different layers and is such a niche way to get a redistribution of resources. And then, yeah, for my local library, one of them is offering a plant exchange where you can just like bring in plants that you have extra of. Like I have spearmint going crazy in my backyard right now. And so I could take in my spearmint, check out what they got, maybe take a few other plants home. And that was an interesting way to see how they're helping just living capital in my local area. But there's also nonprofits that are out in places in Eastern Europe and all over parts in Africa as well, hooking up local farmers to their libraries with the technology that they didn't have prior to that, giving them cell phones and computers So that way they can access research and maintain their crops and fields better and improve their local environments and improve their local commons. So I don't know, does anybody have anything that they've seen at their libraries, any experiences that they've had that have been really interesting? Because like I grew up at the library because I was relatively poor growing up. I'd always come back with a big stack of books and a collection of Bill Nye the Science Guy videos. Just interested to see if anybody else has had good experiences at the library. Because when I asked people about that in Kernel, it was pretty fun.
I also grew up at the library. I spent a lot of time there. I would go there almost every day after school, I think. And it was such a, it was like a community center. Like, we would all hang out there after school, and it was like a safe place. It was across the street from my elementary school, just like a little bit of a walk. So it was like safe enough that kids could go there and then their parents could pick them up there. That was like a pretty common practice. I love this idea of the plant exchange at the library that you just described. That's so wonderful. I've been thinking a lot, like, since I started learning about 3D printers and automation technology, I've been thinking a lot of like the future of how that kind of technology could be distributed through a library mechanism, like that in the future we would have like 3D printed house 3D printers that print houses in a public library, and then like an open source library of plans for using those 3D printed houses, or like to make whatever you need, like, probably smaller items than houses as well. But yeah, I'm really curious of how like libraries can stretch beyond books. I mean, they already do, but yeah, like into interesting new technological territories. I'm really excited for this discussion that you're bringing.
Yeah. So there's a concept called maker spaces. And essentially, like right here with the material capital, they give people access to resources and tools they otherwise wouldn't have. Because for a lot of like hobbies like 3D printing, woodworking, welding, glass blowing, like a whole bunch of those various, even pottery, even like a potter's wheel can be kind of pricey. There's a whole initial investment that can be kind of hard to go into things like that. And then when you come up to materials that you need to keep performing those hobbies, like raw materials that you need, be it wood, filament for 3D printers, etc., there's a whole lot of capital that goes into that. So there's a thing called maker spaces where essentially it's like a library. They have a big thing set up where they occasionally offer classes and courses. They have people come in and they teach people like these various trades, even like simple like programming courses, like for Python and like SQL and like things like that, because computers are another one of those resources. But libraries currently tend to have basic things like that. Like I think my public library is doing an Excel course in the coming weeks. But yeah, there was a book I saw, I think by like John Burke, that talked about integrating maker spaces into libraries. So I think there's a small subset of librarians that already wishes to do something like this, because I think currently most maker spaces operate on like a subscription model. Like honestly, before I came into Web3, I wanted to make my dream was to make a maker space that could offer free access to lower income people, and just use the profits, I guess, from the people who could afford subscription models to just allow people to come in and have access for free when they couldn't. Because I feel like, especially in the city I live in, when there's such a huge disparity when it comes to income, something like that would be awesome. Like it would allow people to do career changes and everything like that. So yeah, maker spaces and giving people open access to raw materials and sources they need are definitely crucial, and would be something that would be really awesome to try to fund into integrating with public libraries. So yeah, I agree, Lanny, 100%. Like that would be amazing. That would be like the perfect world. You can go in, you can pick up a book, you can go sit down next to a 3D printer, learn how to do wireframes, and just choose a filament and just start hacking away at it. or have somebody there within that makerspace tech lab that is like general purpose to ask stuff. Like you have librarians within stuff that can help you from general research to just finding a niche book you're looking for. And so, like, yeah, the only thing that I think might be able to lead into, bit into the next slide, unless anybody else has experiences they would like to share. Sorry. I just got excited. Maker spaces are a wonderful idea, and I wish we would see more of those pop up and around, especially, if they could be tied in with public libraries.
Yeah,
I just wanted to.
Oops, sorry.
I just wanted to say one thing about. I posted on this in the chat, but Houston has done a tool bank. And so any community can, just like you check out a book, you can check out, 20 shovels and 10 rakes and do a cleanup. And and even like heavy duty things like a chainsaw or a, wheelbarrow, and like you just put in your order and it's a massive warehouse. And to me, like the way that they're charging for it is like 3% of the total cost of the tool. So whereas if you go to Home Depot and you want to buy one, you're buying it for like a shovel for like $20. You're renting it for 3% of $20, which is so much more reasonable and accessible. And to me, it's an immediate repurposing of value for, common creation. And then the other thing that is really nice adjacent to this is open source manufacturing. What you mentioned about the ESL classes and the Excel and the 3D printing training. Imagine if we have open source ability to build a 3D printer or build a tractor. Might be a little bit not for the library, but you start to think about the industrial machines that we use and being able to produce them yourself using open source manufacturing.
Yeah,
So
libraries would be a good hub for those people to meet. Like it'd be a good area for them to organize, because from a lot of things that I saw, the library is mostly just used as a host for people to pursue those programs, like similar things like that. It's just used as a tool for coordination within local communities. So as long as we could figure out how to fund and put together those programs, I feel like that could be something easily achievable. It would just be opening these tools up to communities that wish to do that. So I imagine, like, say, for instance, open manufacturing with building your own like tractor, for instance, that would be really, that would probably be very sought after in more rural communities where that's more of a trade, because there's a part in Ohio where there's an entire agricultural college where their entire focus is agriculture. Like that's the whole point. You go there and you come out with a degree in agricultural maintenance, and then you just work on farms, maintaining farms. So even within academia, there's a good need for that within the academic view of libraries. Like, yeah, that'd be cool. And then Armando, you wanted to say something?
Yes, I very inspiring, and it makes me, I don't think it's a coincidence that a lot of religious organizations and community centers, they kind of attach a library to the complex. So I think that libraries are a good way for people to grab the physical books, but also it's kind of the wider part is like this community where people can gather. And also what I think is like for all these, like I posted a link for the library of things, so you can see a lot of actual things that people are sharing right now. And I think that maybe the just the physical stuff is not the most important one, because okay, you have the thing, but if you like when people said about maker spaces, so if you combine this physical thing with maybe a course that some expert is giving in that time, and then a networking at the end, and then maybe a hackathon where people can actually build something with those tools. So suddenly it's way more important, and it's more valuable, and maybe also you can create this economic sustainable system, so you combat the problem of the commons. So yeah, I think it's really cool that, and as Gitcoin or everybody that is building Web3 and open source and stuff, it would be really great to start having these small places where people can gather and build stuff.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. Especially since at the very least, a lot of libraries tend to have a tech lab, so people at the very least have access to a group of computers. So if there was at least a programming lab where people could open up stuff like that in a safe environment, so people can just slap together their first few like Python scripts or whatever, or just hack through like C++ or whatever they feel like going through. Yeah, it's not wholly completely about having the physical aspect. Yeah, and then with QZ, I haven't read Asimov. I feel slightly ashamed as a sci-fi fan, but yeah, when I go into the library and dig through the sci-fi section, the vast Asimov section is never ending. Just wanted to remark on that. I need to read. I feel ashamed. I have not.
Like on the sci-fi section.
Yeah, he takes up like his own like shelf.
Yeah,
it's pretty nuts.
So my dad was a sci-fi fan, so I think it's interesting in the sense that the library was like a bonding experience for me. Because usually he's like super quiet at home, and then like when he walks by the sci-fi section, and he'll be like, "Oh, you got to read this." I read it as a child, and so that was something that I didn't expect the library to do for me, which is like parental bonding.
Yeah, I would always go with my mom, and she would come out with a stack of Stephen King books and some V.C. Andrews, and would complain about ghostwriters to me before I would even understand what the hell that was. So I would always come out with a stack of Star Wars novels and Tolkien, a lot of Tolkien, as like a little like third, fourth grader. It was a lot of fun. But yeah, so even through the conversations that I think we're having, there's a lot of ways to see how these libraries in and of themselves as a form of commons would also be generative. The resources, once they're collected, it's a massive source of data that people can then utilize to come to their own conclusions, come up with their own things that they would like to do based off of that, and then everything around it just flourishes and grows, just as long as people have access to an abundant amount of resources, be them physical like raw materials, books, movies, and even music. As I don't know, sharing the human experience is very, very crucial, I think, in growing and maintaining as a society. But yeah, I'm trying not to get too philosophical, but I just love libraries so damn much. With continuing on with the talk on the commons, though, and the tragedy of the commons, something that Aaron Maniam had mentioned in his talk was the tragedy of the digital commons would be something akin to underutilization, data not being utilized in the best ways, websites and tools not being utilized in the best ways. Down here at the bottom is just two little excerpts. I haven't actually read Eleanor Ostrom's work, and I just started to, but on the second page, something that stood out to me was a quote that she had ended up using from Aristotle, is that what is common to the greatest number has the least care bestowed upon it. Everyone thinks chiefly of his own, hardly at all of the common interest. And with data in mind, especially personal data, with the overabundance of personal data on the internet, I feel like data is one of the largest commons that we have, and likewise, there isn't much care put upon it. People just kind of accept a baseline of trust. And that trust is my privacy in and of itself will be relatively invaded. I can't talk around my cell phone without getting ads on Instagram or Twitter about whatever conversation I was having, kind of thing. So there's already there's so much data out there that is vastly underutilized for social good, but is very much misappropriated. And I think that could be another tragedy of the digital commons, is misappropriation and siloing by few powerful people. So in a sense, weaponizing the commons against the greater community for the sake of monetization. So with that, there's some trust trade-offs and degradation as these platforms become bigger and bigger. Like you can just look at Twitter, for instance. There's like a huge there's so much data on that. There's also a huge pushback for censorship and like just a huge social reckoning happening on the site when it comes to what it means to be a public forum versus what it means to be a private or a public company. Transparency issues and things like that. And even within the library, there's a bit of trust assumptions that when you go into those, that you'll be able to find resources and get the access to things that you should be able to get there. With the DeSci movement, for instance, on a scholarly aspect of libraries, I think most everybody in this space has ran into a paywall when it comes to trying to look into a paper, like a research paper of some kind or some journal that's locked behind one of the numerous publishers of like academic papers. And it's like $47 just for 48-hour access to a PDF and like $90 for permanent access to it. Or you could pay like a whole bunch of money for a subscription service to get access to those. But so there's decentralized means of dealing with those disparities in academia and access to knowledge, access to data within DeSci. But there's also a huge push within that within the greater librarian community as well, scholarly librarians, with initiatives such as Tome, which is a Tord and open monograph ecosystem, which monographs are just very specific research papers. But even finding those is very difficult. So there's a clear need to have open, transparent, and better usage of data, be them general studies or just books, even if they're just fiction books. In a kind of, what's the word I'm thinking? In a roundabout way, in the thought of old school pirates, though, there's even an initiative to maintain a public library that is free and open no matter what. So there's been a push by this group called Library Genesis even to pin a vast amount of books and research papers on the IPFS. So there's already a decentralized push to do stuff like this, just in a roundabout way that might not be necessarily legal, but the information's already out there and the access is there for people to get, which is, in my opinion, still very core to what Web3 is about, is just pure openness, like relentless transparency. And it's very interesting because they've even set technical standards for what books go uploaded into this massive hoard look like when it comes to metadata. Like they have metadata standards and everything like that, which makes everything really well indexed and searchable. And like that's what I think, one of the main things I think we could offer to the library is make everything really, really well indexed, really well searchable. And then even build a couple things on top of that data layer to make the library more transparent, more accessible, and to give things more better context. I'll touch on in a little bit. So with what we can offer Web3, or what Web3 can offer libraries, is there's a huge need for governing tools all the way down to the local level, and this is something that Web3 has been smashing their head against the wall ever since like the DAO and that massive collapse. So like governance mechanisms are like core Web3 like experimental, like it's an experience more or less. Like everybody's been a victim of some kind of governance attack at this point. So we've already tested a massive amount of novel governance mechanisms. And when it comes to people looking at the commons nowadays in relation to Eleanor Ostrom's like work in regards to governing the commons, I even have a little excerpt from a blog from Scientific American where people were where the author was just talking about how we need better trusted governance models, more transparent models, and we need them faster we just need them quickly. That way we can focus on microcosm problems within the commons. And I think that's something that we can definitely offer. We've been operating on more of a global layer, and we've built a really well battle-tested financial layer. But I believe we have a whole bunch of solutions that we could offer down to the local layer if we can put on our little activism hats and start walking into facilities and trying to give them all the green pill too. Because I think there's a bit of work to destigmatize Web3 from all the press we've gotten in the last year or so, and especially even in the last week with the collapse of Luna. So it's been a ride in Web3 when it comes to mainstream media and our perception, I guess. But there's still a massive regen side that it doesn't seem like it's had a light shine on it or shown on it very well. And I don't know, I think a grassroots approach would do us very, very well. So I also included down here in the bottom right corner on a sign of the very smallest governance I've seen within, oh, come on. First Cat's trying to say hello. She's trying to jump over my laptop. I apologize. But the smallest scale of governance I've seen within, come here, Fanny. There we go. But the smallest scale of governance I've seen on a local level has been all the way down to a neighborhood level. So within a couple blocks, we have a president, a vice president, a secretary, and a treasurer. And with Joel's conversation from last week in regards to local blockchain technology, I feel like this would be a very interesting way to move in and integrate communities with technology that could help them both be transparent, improve communication and coordination with each other, and various things like that. Because on this forum, we also got updates about food drives and stuff like that. So having better tools for coordination within the neighborhood, better transparency for what in the heck this treasury is, because like why would a couple block neighborhood association need a treasury and things like that? Like there's a whole lot of just simple governance mechanisms that we could probably offer the smallest micro community within local communities, and those tools could be distributed through the library, in my honest opinion. All you need to do is just go in there. You could have somebody help set up like even if it's just setting up like a basic Gnosis multisig, get something set up like that, give them a basic forum. Mondo?
Yes, just a quick thought about everything you're saying, and also what is being posted on the chat right now that I think is really inspiring. Really inspiring, all these like the San Francisco project and the commons, because also trying to remember my early experiences with libraries when I was a kid. I really hated the silence around libraries, and I'm trying to think like in those days, okay, so the thing was, okay, everybody's here to read books, so please shut up, be quiet, and just leave. and hope you learn a lot, but that's it, right? So like when you see this kind of imagery where you can try to imagine that people are actually going to join and have a conversation, build things together. So maybe, yeah, like people were talking about maybe the need for rebranding for libraries. So yes, we I think there's like it has to be a new era of what we think a public hub should be, or maybe I don't know if the library is the word that should be used, but just trying to think how silence is not a very good thing if you want to learn with everybody else.
Yeah, I totally agree, Armando. I think library may have a certain unchangeable connotation that isn't community center. And I don't, it's kind of, I don't know what will be better. But also this discussion is amazing. Thank you for leading it. This is trying to figure out how to create like hyper local DAOs that empower like especially like marginalized youth to manage shared treasury and leverage library resources and improve the library and improve their local communities. This is actually, I think that's actually, there's actually a few things that could be more important for Web3 to be trying to do. So this is really awesome.
I appreciate that. This has been a really fun rabbit hole to go down and be reinvigorated in the last few weeks with the last like few calls, even with the Othello call and local governance and the democratic fair decision making. Like that was hugely inspirational for me to start taking this rabbit hole even further. So yeah, this has been fun. Because I really do believe that we have the tools to pretty much create like a fractal scaling of local communities that are all still linked together, especially with the proliferation of like L2s and things like that on Ethereum. So yeah, it'd be really, really awesome. And then, so then I'm gonna shill a little concept about library cards for a moment, because like I feel like this has been in the back of my head for a minute now. So library cards are a very easily accessible source of identification. Identification in the US in particular can be pretty hard to acquire because you need to have multiple forms of other identification, like birth certificates, social security cards, proofs of address, multiple proofs of address from very specific institutions like bill providers and things like that. So there's so many hoops that you already have to go through just to get like a legal form of identification, which impacts voting systems in the US and disenfranchises a whole metric like crap ton of people. Just the whole myriad of people get impacted by that, and it's mostly marginalized communities. With needing better systems for governance, better systems for representation within these systems that we could create if we spin up protocols at the local level, at the very like microcosm, like very focused level on individual commons within those local communities. And my thought behind giving people access to that via something that would be, in my opinion, pretty Sybil resistant would be library cards. If in the perfect world, if all of the library like data, if all that information was hosted redundantly on Arweave and IPFS and Ceramic, and like every library ran nodes and things like that to give access to that public ledger, all those public ledgers, the library card would essentially be a wallet. It would be a gateway not only into library and access to those resources, but it would also be your gateway into Web3. It could function as a wallet. It could be something as simple as the library card being like an ERC 1155 like NFT that can carry other like things and contain other things within it. It could be a myriad of different things. But the library card in and of itself being only able to be given to like one person, you have one library card, you have one account with them. It would be a means for a social recovery wallet as well, which would be pretty awesome to have. And yeah, like, it would just be a great tool for civil resistance and a way for people to make sure they have their way to connect and be a part and participate within local governance without needing to go through all the hoops of having an ID. And I think that would be absolutely amazing. So if the library cards were eventually one day linked to Web3, it would be able to probably be plugged into a bunch of different decentralized identity protocols just for the sake of civil resistance. And I think that would be amazing. Any thoughts on library cards as a tool for civil resistance? Because I personally think that would be great in the perfect world. Like,
and so can you just walk us through, like, what typically, what do you need to show to get a library card? Like proof of residence?
Yeah, usually just proof of residence within the city, but there's a huge initiative for them to also hook homeless people up with library cards and things like that so they can access those resources too. So it's not limited to you have to show like a bill or something like that. Like, access to these systems is fairly like open.
Cool.
And
I think this is
yeah.
great. Yeah, it's kind of like what you're saying is you're like, let's not reinvent the wheel and just tap into people that have been thinking about how to be inclusive.
Yeah,
already.
yeah. There's a huge wealth of resources and wealth of people out there already that are focused on similar things. Even from within the Web3 community, a lot of people are working on adjacent things, but different models. So it makes sense for them to work on different models. So we got to figure out what works, which is what makes Web3 so great for a rapid iterating thing. Like, because even Gitcoin has Moonshot Collective to focus on rapid iterating with Scaffold ETH. Like, so yeah, I don't know. There's just.
I feel so excited about this idea of like physical IRL protocols. Like, you know, when we talk about protocols in Web3, it's often like a technological protocol, but I like thinking about like implementing like a protocol that can be activated in an existing IRL structure like this that could be replicated in local communities. I think one of the things I really appreciate about the conversation you're having, I think one of the problems for the perspective a lot of people building in Web3 is kind of like, and it's an inherited globalist mindset, thinking we need to like solve everyone's problems and that we can like create these monolithic systems. I mean, like obviously we're talking about decentralized systems usually, but like still in the idea, this monolithic system that then everyone will be able to use and it'll be great. But I think like activating and tapping into something like a public library allows for like us to really embrace this idea that every local community has their own needs, and like by bridging and working within these existing community models, like we can, instead of imposing our system or idea on them, that this could be like an interesting and seamless way for folks to also like progressively get involved, or like, you know, that it can be like at their own pace and not like a all at once kind of a thing, but sort of a modular building on top of the existing thing, or, you know, letting that be a foundational framework. I think that that's really exciting.
Yeah, that would be nice. And seeing talks in chat about the quiet spaces and various spaces within stuff. In larger metropolitan areas, like the city I live in, they have quiet rooms dedicated with like huge tables and for people to work at, or even just chairs and smaller tables off to the sides by the windows for people to work on whatever it is they're doing or read. Like up until about Well, 2.5 months ago now, I was technically homeless, so I kind of lived at the library for quite a bit, and I made use of those spaces for a little bit. So they were a godsend to keep doing stuff as I was working on things. Like I would go in there quite a bit to do research and sit down and read and catch up on happenings within Web3 just because I needed a quiet space. And it was a really good source for that. Our main branch is freaking gigantic, which kind of put the emphasis on disparities between metropolitan libraries versus rural libraries. Because the library where in the hometown where I grew up, I still go there every now and again, and you can fit like a dozen of my hometown library just inside the main branch of the metropolitan library in the city I live in. And then on top of that, there's at least a dozen other branches of this one library system. So the Dayton Metropolitan Library has about 13, 14 different branches, and then one main hub. And that main hub does kind of operate as like a community hub. Like kids go there after the school like crazy because it's just off the bus line, central location in town. Lots of parks in the area right around there, so they can just like walk about like 10 minutes away and then be next to the river, Miami River, that cuts Dayton in half. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of spaces. They have a computer lab that's separate in its own individual room. The kids section is awesome because they even have a play area. So for the kids area, it's not wholly about being quiet. It's just about how they engage with the library and encouraging that engagement, even if it is through play. Hell, when you go into the library after high school lets out and you go towards the young adult section in there, the little teen section, it can get pretty noisy, but it's a big enough library to handle the noise. They designed it, I think, to handle it so like everything kind of disperses out. It's a very open building, so when you get far enough away from it, you don't really notice it. But that's a privilege of metropolitan areas and funding that larger cities can have, where rural areas funding the libraries tends to kind of disappear, unfortunately. So I don't know, that is, in my opinion, the tragedy of the commons of libraries. In isolated areas, like if we look at things in like a mycorrhizal network, rural areas are more isolated from the rest of the forest, so they don't get to share as much nutrients to their roots. And even then, there tends to be such a difference in culture that their roots don't like to talk to each other as much. A lot of the fungi in their networks don't really communicate very well, so those resources don't bridge. And then likewise, the smaller trees in those localized rural forests just kind of suffer for it, just because the community as a whole, there's a bit of a culture difference. Like you can see that very, very well in the US when it comes to red versus blue maps when it comes to population densities in the more rural areas. So there's a huge difference in priorities, even in what resources that they would like, which I guess kind of ties into my last slide because this took forever. But I'm very happy for the conversation we've had through it, so thank you guys. So when it comes to challenging norms that exist within commons, because norms are set up to, like, again, what a more reflection on the conversation from Aaron Maniam was, norms exist to kind of help govern commons on a social level. But when those norms are challenged, there tends to be a bit of a social immune response against those, like against that can come through a myriad of ways. And like in regards to the library, the US has seen book bannings historically forever. Like it happened towards the end of Jim Crow and segregation in the US. There was a bunch of books that were banned in regards to just the human experience, which to me is mind-boggling that you could see the human experience as something that's inappropriate to share. But that's happening again recently in the US with a focus on school libraries, which I still don't really think school libraries are much more different than a regular library, because it's not like kids don't have access to both. But yeah, nonetheless, there's a bit of a social response that impacts information dissemination and access to resources, just depending on how new they are. Even Web3 is experiencing this culture shock because like most everybody thinks Web3 is a bunch of like, and the greater zeitgeist, there's still a huge amount of people that think Web3 is mostly scams and Ponzi's and ridiculously overpriced NFTs, which they also liken to nothing but scams. And they miss a huge key infrastructure that has been built underneath that, like the technology that propagates that. And I think with that, we could offer, if we can break through that stigma, and with the tools that we have to offer that aren't out to financialize and over gamify and commodify everything, like just simple tools for building up and spinning up local infrastructure just to keep resources pinned more locally, as opposed to having them disseminate out, because when a community can maintain resources better, that community tends to thrive better. Be it financial resources or material and living resources. But with that, that knee-jerk reaction for censorship goes both ways. I've included links to a couple things in here, but there's been a huge push for anything regarding critical race theory and LGBT experiences within the public libraries, like an effort to remove those experiences. But there's also, on the inverse side of it, been an effort to remove anything that can be likened to propaganda, be them like misinformation, things like that. But I think removing that and censoring things like that wholeheartedly removes the ability to contextualize those things. So I believe that's where we could come through as well, because there's a need for a transparent curation system, because there was a huge push for transparency, and how did propaganda get pushed onto like a huge digital library, to where when people looked up the Holocaust, the first thing they saw was a bunch of Holocaust denial books. Like there's a huge push for how did that happen? Like how did the algorithms, like how did the information filtration system let that appear? And we work in nothing but building transparent systems. Everything we do is human readable, to an extent. Everything you can go through, you can click a transaction, you can read down to the nitty gritty and read every byte detail that went into that. So that's the next thing I think that we should probably try to work on, is trust systems, building more transparent trust systems. Because when things are given proper context by a community that people trust, it allows people to reach better consensus upon what that information actually means. It allows people to get context behind it, and it would also allow things to be more better indexed and searchable, more accessible. It will allow people to find what they're looking for easier, and then likewise, hopefully, find people that they can learn from within the curation setting. Because I don't know, there's so much more to this, and I feel like this could be like a whole other hour if we just keep going, honestly, which is the worst.
No,
we're almost out of time.
Yeah, no, so yeah, we're about at the hour, but if you have time after and people have time after, we can stay to talk for like another 15, 20 minutes if you want to. Where are you at with time, Sel?
Oh, I'm good. Like I have all the time in the world.
Yeah, so if you all want to stay on for a little longer and continue the conversation, I feel like the hour flew by so fast.
It did.
It felt 15 minutes. Like, it's crazy. Yeah, I'm just loving this, so I mean, I'm going to stay on, but if you all need to hop, feel free.
All right. But oh yeah. So like I think there's already there's a trust system that's being worked on for stewards even within Gitcoin. So the trust system is like a need for a clear trust mechanism is already even apparent within Web3, and maintaining well, transparent, and trusted governance systems. So if you look at a library from like a data level, like a data layer level, what could be built on top of that then would be the curation level. So, which is essentially what librarians do already. They curate, they bring in books, they remove books from the shelves at different times. They try to curate what they offer to the local communities based on local needs already. So they're a pretty good reflection of their local communities. But with the digital library, there still needs to be a trusted system, a trusted group of people that are curating that information, and hopefully also a group of people contextualizing that information. That way, one, we don't silo off things and allow them to proliferate, because usually when you ban something and tell people, no, don't read that, it has the opposite effect. I'm pretty sure that's a very well documented thing. Telling people, no, don't do that, makes them want to do that. Especially when it comes to information. So, yeah. That leads to like a whole other conversation that I don't really know too much on, because I'm not an author or a publisher. I haven't tried to publish much of anything, but because we've mostly been dealing with, or mostly been talking about relations to libraries and the public, libraries and the communities. But there's another stakeholder, and that's the people who write and create the resources for the library, authors and publishers. And I know the relation from author to publisher can be pretty strenuous, be it a like corporate publisher or a university publisher, because funding at university level for publishing can even be kind of strenuous. Oh, bye, Lenny. But yeah, Streisand effect. Yeah, sorry, I was completely blanked on the term for it. But yeah, there's an entire relationship that needs to be built a little bit more on trust too between authors and publishers, and connecting everything through Web3 with a massive data layer that we could offer libraries could also give authors a better means of engaging with their readers, which I already know within the DeSci community, having a source for traceable citations and traceable impact of research papers is already thought about and being worked on. But even on just like a fiction writer, their ability to engage with their audience could be very much elaborated on through the library. It's just a matter of improving relations with libraries, access to publishing, and various things like that. So it'd be really neat to have access to publishing via local libraries, if, depending on how financial mechanisms and local mechanisms are propped up for them, if they even had like a separate pool for grant funding for local projects, local writers, and things like that. Like that would be something that would be really cool to see in the future. Is how libraries could impact and change the face of publishing and author relationships. Because again, that's something I'm relatively ignorant to. But I know in Kernel there was a few authors and writers. So since it's a silent block, I might have to bother people in Slack and see if people are still willing to talk about the relationships with publishers. Because in a general glance or cursory glance over it yesterday, seems like certain publishers are more willing to work with libraries than not, but it's still a very commodified thing. It's still a very resource intensive thing to put on libraries to add these books to their collections. Like it's a very much a bartering thing with publishers to get their books in their collections. And I don't know, I would like to see a way to ingrain altruism into the library on like a core like protocol level. And I don't know, that's a huge separate train of thought. But that's all I really have for the slides though. I have I have a section, a link here. I can share the slideshow with anybody that wants it after the call too. I can put it the link in there, like in the thread. But yeah, I don't know, any thoughts from the class?
Oh,
quick thoughts on the links. I think if you could share this with us, you can lock it and then share it
Yeah.
with us, and then we can also like have that pasted in the thread, or you can send that in the thread.
Yeah.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, I
if
can.
you want to reference
I
it.
can open those up and just send them as a big message instead. I think that would be easier.
Yeah. But I just want to say this has been a very inspiring talk. Like ever since I entered, I think it's very interesting to have a conversation about a library. I guess like from my thought, like I think it's one of the places where I really appreciate, like, when you walk into the building, you can feel the vibe and the culture of its entirety, right? You walk in and you know what it's about, you know what to expect out of a library, because also I think it's also set from like at a very young age, the introduction of a library, beginning with schools, right? So I don't know. I think that has to do with like you understand the culture of it through narrative and experience at a young age. And I think a lot of like we always ask like how do we people know about Web3? How do people understand values and ethics and all that? And I think a lot of it just like kind of comes down to like experience, like first exposure, understanding of like concept and context. Because right now most people's like first exposure is like NFTs, money, scam, Ponzi. So those are like some of the first thing that comes to mind because that's their first exposure when it comes to like reading these mainstream media. I'm like, why don't we talk more about like the grants and the funding and all like the positive thing? Like, I always wonder why people don't look at the other side. Like, why else? Like a deeper research into like the technology and so on. So I think it's just quite interesting to.
Well, why would they have a positive?
Well, in a research, you want to look at both sides of the story. I was assuming that they would have to do, more research on like the positives, like why would people be entering here, right? So, but obviously, I can see why people are just like negative about it. But I'm just saying, like, there's a lack of research on both sides.
Yeah, well, I think this applies for almost everything, right? Like, do people ask why? I know. I think people make up their mind. People like to confirm what they wanted to believe, right? Also, like
bias.
Very, bias. Very few people have the opportunity to be part of this public goods library call that exposes them to a lot of great people and great ideas that are trying to make things better. So that's actually why I think like there's kind of two kinds of things that need to happen to change people's minds. It's hyper local projects that make people's lives better that aren't Web3 maxis already. And then it's storytelling around those projects. And there's a lot of other things that need to happen, but I think those are the two things that are greatly missing in Web3. Because like right now, Web3 is serving people that like love DeFi, like and love, Lambos. It's not a
wholeheartedly agree.
It's not a perception thing either, right? That's just the truth.
No.
Like it's the vast majority. Like there's people that have millions of followers. I saw that there's a guy on Twitter that has 1 million followers, and he just posts price predictions for random altcoins. I'm like, oh, like
that's the first thing people see when they go on Twitter and they look up crypto. It's the first thing I saw. I had to dig deeper to come across devs, and then I started coming across like Anthony Sassano, and then fell into the public goods thing. But that took a while. That still took like when I was first trying to find a home on crypto Twitter to find the people to follow. Still took a solid like 3 weeks just to get through that noise, that Lambo noise. So you're not wrong.
For sure.
Also,
yeah. So that this one random influencer has 10 times more followers than the Gitcoin account, right? I'm done. But this putting things in perspective.
Yeah. And you wanted to say something, Madison?
Yeah, I would say I think it comes down to relevancy. So people care about things that are relevant to them and improve their lives. Like you all are here because Web3 was relevant to you and resonated with you in some way for things that you already cared about or needs that you had. And so there's just going to be different ways to make it relevant to different people. And libraries are a great way to make it relevant to people who wouldn't have joined otherwise. And so I think that's what a lot of this question comes down to, of like, how do we onboard people, how do we scale, is basically how do we make it relevant to people's lives?
Yeah. So real quick, I'm so sorry. The last time I went into the library was Saturday. And it was to get some resources for this call, take a picture of that board, for instance, of all the different flyers that they have for different events that they were having. And ended up, my spouse was there, and I was sitting there just collecting resources and working on this presentation. My spouse was talking to this one nice kid for a moment. Then when I finished up, because the library was closing, got to talking to him for a moment, and he was like, "So you do stuff in crypto?" And we actually had an open conversation about it, because it's one of the nice things about living in a larger city where there's a larger minority population, to the point where honestly white people are the minority here in Dayton. So yeah, it's interesting getting aspects from other cultures, because he got a ledger for Christmas. Like, somebody gave him a ledger for Christmas within his family, and he never set it up yet, nothing about it. And so public perception isn't wholly negative. A lot of what we see online is still very siloed. Like, it's a whole lot of the Western, like, hyper activist crowd that can't quite grasp things outside of a US centric point of view or a Eurocentric point of view, to see how these protocols are impacting lives of marginalized communities. And like, I've had 2 conversations in recent weeks with people locally to me that had pretty much damn near no idea what Web3 was, and they were earnest to hear about it. So on a grassroots, like you're talking hyper local level, I think the best way to proliferate what we're doing here and get it to spread and to destigmatize it is at a hyper local level. It's at a grassroots activism level, which there's a whole slew of people that are pretty well involved in that. So I think if we can show them the tools that we're building isn't just about hyper financialization and Lambo and stuff like that, but can be used as a tool for resource retention. Like, for instance, there's been a push in recent years to shop local, and to not only that, but also support Black businesses and things like that, because there's been huge studies on lifespan of money within communities and how well those communities fare when they're able to keep resources within their communities. And like, there's been some pretty shocking turn of events when people tend to do too well with retaining resources, at least in the US, if you look at the history of like Black Wall Street. So there's been a very like systemic thing to keeping people from retaining resources, at least in the US over time. But I feel like if we empower them to have sovereignty over their resources and the ability to keep them, and we have tools for that, tools for helping people maintain sovereignty over like cultural identity, over financial identity, and eventually maybe even political identity, as hopefully governance moves towards a more transparent and decentralized means. Because I would hope that over time, in like a couple decades maybe, a lot of the stuff for governance mechanisms on like a statewide or political level are done like on chain. Like that would be amazing through some kind of ZKP protocol. But
yeah, a big plus one. I came back really quickly to say one of the coolest things I've seen at the public libraries in my area, which is Los Angeles, is there's a artist residency program that is a teaching residency. So basically there's a nonprofit called Project Art that employs artists to basically do like an arts program out of the local libraries, and they're across like many libraries across the country. But what I think would be really interesting to explore maybe is like Gary something, and Madison as well, like something with DreamDAO activating local libraries as like a bridge point with, like utilizing those physical spaces to do some kind of like a youth education project, or like a youth art education project. And like I think like also art is like a really beautiful way entry point for Web3 too, especially like now that there are so many less expensive ways to mint NFTs. Like you can really bring young artists and kids in through that mechanism. And I would love to see, like, I feel like Sel, you've opened up such a beautiful bridge here, or like, you know, a portal into like how like Web3 orgs could activate physical spaces and, you know, become a bridge for